Hello, welcome everybody to tonight's, what one are we on? We're on our third session in this series. I'm Catherine, I work for the Stove Network and have been part of our core team here, exploring ways of working with creativity as part of our community, and also now in thinking about that as an approach that can be shared and joined up with other places regionally and further afield. Like I said, this is the third of a series of online events the Stove Network is hosting to explore creative and community embedded working between artists, community groups, other individuals and partners who have the intent on affecting social change for the places that they live. This is an approach that the Stove has been testing and trialing and exploring with others, and we're now talking about as creative placemaking. We define creative placemaking as a community-led approach that uses creative activity to support collective decision making, and like I said, have a positive impact for the places that we all live. So this is an intentional way of talking about and repositioning this term within place development, planning and regeneration to describe a grassroots approach that is driven and led by communities to grow their places and the people that live there in ways that connect with those who are often less present and heard in decision making. And this series of webinar discussions is part of a month-long series of activities focused on getting into that a little bit more with people, into the principles of this community-led way of working. We're looking at some of the main themes that we see emerging within this work. We've already talked about space, physical and conversational. We've talked about people and power. And tonight we're talking about society and activism. And next week we'll be talking about communities and creative practice. So this evening, looking at society and activism, we've been thinking about questions like, how can we radically rethink our structures for deeper community well-being? What role can creativity and creative practice have in changing our attitudes and behaviours? And how can small-scale initiatives support larger movements and bring about positive change in society? For some of that, and probably for many other ways of thinking about that theme, we're joined by Jimmy Paul of Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland. Jimmy has a background in health and social care systems and will be sharing his experiences and learning from this, and also his work with Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland, where I suppose the way that I get it when we've been talking, Jimmy, there's that real ambition to place underrepresented communities and voices at the forefront of the wellbeing economy movement. So I am going to hand over to you now. It's great to have you here this evening.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm just going to start sharing my screen. I am delighted to be joining you for your series of sessions. And yes, I'm Jimmy Paul, the Director at Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland, and I'll be spending some time talking about the wellbeing economy and the role of creativity, the arts, and I've also added a bit about storytelling as well, and why all of those things are crucially important. Now, I wanted to start with the word economy, because the word economy used to frighten me, put me off. Someone once explained to me, though, that all it means is how we provide for one another, how we trade goods and services to provide for one another, how we, in Greek, it translates to how we live within our household. And when you think of it in those terms, actually it feels less of this very abstract thing that we don't know about, and more like something that actually we create and we shape, and we have the ability to reimagine as well. So how can we reimagine the economy so that it serves us and works better for us? Obviously a very pertinent question at this moment in time. So I'm delighted to join you, and I'm just going to jump straight into it. And I'm going to start by talking a bit about what a wellbeing economy is, assuming no knowledge. So the current story is that we take the long road option. That is, we get the economy to grow bigger, but don't fret too much about the damage it does to people or the environment. we sequester a chunk via taxation, and we channel some of that money into helping people and planet cope with step number 1. So we try to grow the economy. Some of the collateral damage of that is harm to people and planet, and then we try to fix it further down the line. But this doesn't take into account the fact that we're living in a code red situation for humanity. The IPCC have been clear on that, and they've gone even further to say there is a rapidly closing window for the sake of humanity. You only need to look at what's happening in Pakistan, what happened here with the heat wave. There was a tornado in Midlothian, not far from where I live, but that's nothing compared to some of the heat waves that we've seen all over the world, the flooding that we're seeing, and how much worse that's getting. And also, we know that environmental justice is a social justice issue. Those things are two sides of the same coin. It is those who are least likely to be able to move, to have the means to move out of the paths of the floods or the locations of the droughts that are going to suffer most. And yet they are contributing the least to climate change and the climate emergency. So that's the first part. And the second part is the social justice element. In Scotland here, we know that 1 in 4 children are growing up in poverty, and that is much likely to worsen in the cost of living crisis that is happening right now and that is due to get worse. And the announcement today about the cap on fuel prices might again plug the overflowing sink temporarily, but future generations are going to have to pay for that. And there's no thinking about ramping up renewables, retrofitting. And again, we're making decisions that will benefit us now in the short term, but not in the long run. And it's frightening. And we know that actually the experiences of children, but not just children, Catherine spoke about my personal passion and our work at WEAll Scotland for, now I'll call them quieter voices. You can call them marginalised voices. You can call them equity deserving voices. Whatever phrase you use, there are people and groups of people who have been systemically ignored in the process of change making, and children are one of those groups. Looked after children is another group. People with disabilities is another group, and you can name more and more and more. And those are the people that are not served first and foremost by the economy. So at WEAll Scotland, we say that we are fair weather friends of GDP, gross domestic product growth, and not its ever faithful followers. And by that, what I mean is we appreciate that there are some parts of Scotland and some parts of the world that need to experience growth. But what is the composition and direction of that growth? Who is it serving? At the moment, again, think about the energy bosses who are going to take billions and billions home through shareholder wins for them. But actually that's not going to the people that need it most, people that are suffering and struggling the most. So that's not good if we're experiencing growth and it's going to those who already have plenty. It's not ideal. And we know that that doesn't deliver for people. So what are some of the other limitations of GDP growth? Actually, at times of natural disaster, at times of war, we're likely to see GDP growth because it results in the creation of jobs or new construction or rebuilding houses. But much of what makes life meaningful and possible isn't captured in GDP. So you think about childcare or unpaid care work or mutual aid groups and all of the lovely innovations that we saw through the pandemic. Lots of those things aren't captured in GDP, and yet we still, and often our media is hugely at fault for this, we almost blindly accept that GDP growth equals good, GDP degrowth, shrinking is bad. And that's not always the case, and we need a much more critical analysis of what makes a good life and some of the measures that reflect that. So I've alluded to this already. A well-being economy delivers social justice on a healthy planet. And at WEAll Scotland, our ambition is not to exist in 15 years' time, because we want to have delivered that goal. We have a really enabling context in Scotland. We have a First Minister that has done a TED Talk on why a wellbeing economy is necessary. We've got things like the Community Wealth Building Bill, the Business Purpose Commission's work, the Promise emerging from the Independent Care Review. lots of different component parts that together are all building that momentum towards a wellbeing economy. And my hope is, even though we've only been a funded organisation for about 18 months, that we don't need to exist in 15 years' time because we've delivered on what we set out to do. I wanted to introduce the concept of failure demand. Now, I've already alluded to this. Failure demand is paying to fix what we continue to break through our economic choices. In the example of, I used to work at the Independent Care Review, which was a root and branch review of Scotland's care system. And I will allude to that throughout this presentation because we embraced creativity, the arts and storytelling as part of that process of systemic change, as part of this process of delivering and building recommendations for national change. And the first time I came across WEAll and WEAll's work was in my understanding of failure demand. One of the co-founders of WEAll Scotland wrote a report for us which detailed that in Scotland we spend £1.6 billion every year downstream ameliorating the damage of Scotland's care system because we get things wrong for families and children and in the care system and when they when they grow into adults. 1.6 billion every year. And actually, if we were to spend a fraction of that in an upstream, precautionary, creative, supportive ways to support families to address the needs that they've got, we would not need to spend that much money downstream. And actually, it's the right thing to do to support families to stay together. And by doing that, we could build the increasing obsolescence of the care system. So this was a really important concept for me. And I'm going to mention a bit of my own personal lived experience. That really chimed with me because I grew up in the care system in England. And I suppose comparing my life with that concept, I could see different times where a little bit of investment, a little bit of support into me or my family would have made the world of difference and would have meant that personally, or me and my family would have struggled a lot less. And that is the case for so many families right now. And that's a concept we need to think of in terms of environmental justice, but also social justice. How can we think in an upstream way that prevents harm happening? Because not only is it morally the right thing to do, but economically as well. So to bring this to life a little bit, we talk about the 5 WEAll needs. Now, these needs have been produced from engagement with people all over the world, and you'll see them reflected in cultures, in organisations, in religious texts, in rituals, everywhere. Connection, a sense of belonging, and institutions that serve the common good. Justice in all of its dimensions at the heart of economic systems, where the gap between richest and poorest is greatly reduced. Nature, a restored and safe natural world for all life. And I think sometimes that one can feel a bit tricky for those of us in Scotland because it can feel often that that is far away somewhere, that's other continents' issues. But actually, when you think of nature and the environment, that is very much the air that we breathe, as well as those in different continents. It's the roads that we walk on. It's the trees and plants that surround us. And of course, we are interrelated with all parts of the world and all continents in the world. Participation. Citizens are actively engaged in their communities and locally rooted economies. And lastly, dignity. Everyone has enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. Now, as I've said, I'm not an economist by academia or trade, but one of my favourite economists that I've come across in this job is a guy called Manfred Max Neef. And he almost flips, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He almost flips it on its head and says, actually, well, as a starting point, we should be thinking about self-actualization as a fundamental human need. The ability to participate and take part in decisions that are made, not just personally, but in our communities, is essential to our well-being. Yes, we have those kind of very basic fundamental human needs, but as part of those is a sense of love and belonging. So it's lovely when the economy comes into social action thinking. And to bring this to life even more, and starting to segue into the later part of this presentation where we talk more about creativity, we talk about the 4 Ps of the economy. Now, to deliver a wellbeing economy needs all of Scotland to play its part, right? We need businesses to step up. We need public sector bodies, the third sector, we need membership bodies, we need everyone, all parts of Scotland. And that can become a little bit of a daunting thing to hear at times. So in order to make that slightly more easy to comprehend and understand, we've built the 4 Ps for change. And if you've got a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, you start with those 4 corners. And the 4 Ps are those 4 corners. When we talk about purpose, what is the express purpose of our economy? Is it to grow at all costs? Or actually, is it to serve people and planet? And when the ultimate goal is to grow at all costs, again, we've uncovered some of the collateral damage that comes with that. But actually, if it's to serve people and planet, then all of the behaviours that filter out of that in terms of the orientation of business, what we invest in, how we tax, the extent to which we build deliberative democracies, completely shift. Prevention. Again, I've already alluded to this one. Acting in an upstream way, preventing harm coming to people and planet in the first place. Pre-distribution. Now, pre-distribution is a term which essentially says we get the economy to do more of the heavy lifting. If you think of the idea of universal basic services, universal basic income, minimum income guarantee, the way in which we provide people with enough to live on so that they can experience dignity and options and choice in what they do will enable people to flourish. So pre-distribution, how we think and act upstream, but how the economy does more of the heavy lifting in that. And being people powered, how actually our citizens are driving the change that we need to see. And I often talk about nothing about us without us approach to change. Which leads us on really nicely into talking about creativity and the wellbeing economy. Now, I say that creativity needs to be more than a mere sweetener for systems change. In my time at the Independent Care Review, we said, and the chair of the review, Fiona Duncan, who is absolutely fab, one of my favourite people and leaders that I look up to, she said, what works for you works in terms of listening to you. And by that, she means to those who had experience of the care system and wanted to contribute and share their stories and share their thoughts with the care review. So creativity was at the heart of that. Children, infants, young people, even adults with care experience who wanted to feed into this process, like I, said, we don't want to meet you staring at the whites of your eyes across a very official looking table and just tell you a sob story. But what we might feel, it's going to be a tricky process to share what we want to share. Immersed in that is trauma and hardship and lots of things that will feel very raw for people because it's that lived experience, and for many of us it's quite recent. But there are other ways to do that that make that feel safe, that make that feel like you're telling more of a story, that mean you're not just staring into the whites of someone's eyes, but as the research tells us, you can be alongside people and sharing the story in that way. So I spent so many hours building Lego buildings with people who wanted to tell their story by building a Lego masterpiece. Play-Doh, drawing, singing, poetry, raps, the lot. It was absolutely fantastic. And in terms of systems change and making sure that people can tell their stories, not just in ways that are convincing, but really in ways that are ethical and safe, we need to embrace creativity. It's very easy for systems to say, you've got to share with us in a certain way because the system is designed to only listen in this way. And that message only serves to reinforce the power imbalance that exists between those who currently hold the power and those with the lived experience or those who want to influence change. So creativity, I say, is crucial in the sharing and seeding of power from those who hold the power to those who should really hold the power. And creativity is a vital way in which to embrace that. And relationships at the heart of change, and creativity is an enabler of relationships. Now, again, through my time at the Care Review, through my time in the looked after children sector, health and social care, and also in what we're doing now at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we know that it's easier to build relationships when there is something to rally around. Again, if it's a theme, if it's art, if it's a way in which to build a song, or everyone coming together with instruments to tell a story, whatever that looks like. And again, I'm not the most creative person, but I'm really not actually, but I can recognize the power of it in group settings and driving change in a way that gets people on board and has relationships at the heart. The arts. So again, too often people are asked or expected to mold in with systems. You know, the system says this is how you can contribute. You families need to work for us. I've come across a fantastic charity called Includem that brings this to life when they say, what does it mean to have out of hours services? Out of hours for who? And we know that breakdowns in family, times of hardship, don't happen between office hours, because most of that time children are in school. So out of hours services, which are often reduced, which are often of less quality, often less able to refer to relevant or other services, are those experienced at the time where most families are experiencing challenges after 5 o'clock or on the weekends. So it's really important to make sure that systems fit around people. And again, art is a huge way to enable that. Now, art can enable people to communicate how they feel safe and comfortable, but not just what's easy and palatable for the system. But it also allows us to capture social change in ways which are much more powerful. An image, a drawing, a painting of someone who wants to share what their story is. At the Care Review, we put together, based on lots of the artistic contributions of people throughout the life of the Care Review, what we call composite stories. And that, Helen, might be something, the Care Review's composite stories, you put in the chat if you don't mind. A way in which to tell stories that is artistic, that is safe, that is ethical, but actually is influencing social change and has activism at the heart. And storytelling, the ability for people to tell truth to power. And again, I think there's a tightrope you need to walk with storytelling, because too often I've seen charities wheel someone out who has lived experience and ask them to be a poster boy or poster girl of that charity, but to share the deepest, darkest moments of their life in order to secure change or secure the funding that they need to secure that looks good for them. And yet when they need it, the support that happens, because it can feel really re-traumatizing doing that, is not enough. It's insufficient for that person who has just poured their heart out, poured their soul out. So storytelling can be powerful. And again, ensuring that people are able and have spaces to speak truth to power through stories, through their own stories, through metaphors, through similes, however they want to, is key. But walking that tightrope of understanding what is safe, when is someone safe to do so? Now, I shared with you earlier that I grew up in the care system, didn't have the best experience of care. I say that is a healed wound for me. I can say that and I won't have any reverberations, any issue with sharing that. But there are some things about my life, as we all have, that it wouldn't feel safe to share in a space like this, or in front of the First Minister or the Deputy First Minister or council leaders or whoever is helping to shape change. So it's important that when we're working with people, with activists, with young people, with those with lived experience, we walk that tightrope of making sure that people are heard and are able to tell their stories, but that it is safe and ethical for them to do so. And your role, everyone in this room, your role as leaders is to understand and build that relationship with those people and make sure it is safe for them to do so. Too often we only have statistics. Now, in previous roles, I've worked in places which have, being frank, frustrated me a little bit, because we focus a disproportionate amount of energy on the statistics. Is it the length of time a child becomes looked after to when they're legally secured? You know, if we've reduced that from 7 years to 2 years, that looks very good. But actually, what does that matter if the child's experience isn't very good? And we need to make sure that stories and storytelling fits alongside statistics to bring to life the change and bring real evidence to the change that we're seeking to make. And that requires a vulnerability on our part, because it would be very simple and easy for us to say, oh, look, these statistics tell us that we're doing well. It's easy enough to rest on that and put that to funders or our managers or whoever's in charge of us, and to say that's enough. It's not, you know, who do we serve? Do we serve our managers and those who fund us, or do we serve those families and communities in front of us? So we have a duty to make sure that stories and storytelling goes alongside statistics to bring life to the reality of what is happening as a result of our work. I mentioned earlier that people must feel safe and it must be on their own terms. And I've already mentioned the composite stories of the promise. At the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we also produce Stories for Life, which is bringing to life the impact of a wellbeing economy, both what's not working well, and if things were working better, and if we had a wellbeing economy in the area of business, for example, what impact that would have on customers. If we had it in public sector, the impact that would have on citizens. So that's another example of storytelling and helping to drive social change. Now, I finished a little bit early, but that means we've got more time for questions and discussion. Thank you very much again for the opportunity, and I look forward to some discussions and hearing the questions just now.
I found that, yeah, really interesting, really nice, sort of bringing together of your work and your lived experience and talking about really big issues, which I think can feel quite impenetrable sometimes, but I love the sort of interlink between social, economic, climate, and talking about how people connect with those, and the role potentially of creativity as a participation mechanism, but also as a means to rally around a theme. And I'm really interested in what you're talking about in terms of that as an enabler for affecting system change. But also, I think that's really interesting what you brought up around the ethics and the responsibilities within this, because it's quite an organic and fluid sector, the way that we're proposing creativity works in this creative placemaking. And sometimes there's a real use in how that sits outside of ethics and certain procedures, but sometimes there's a real danger in that as well. So thank you, that was brilliant.